Thank you, Diana, very much. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming again, and Terry Lenzner. Nice to see you, and welcome to the Hill Center.
Thank you, Bill.
I just want to say as we start, this is a great book. It's really a lot of fun, and it's a book to read. It's also a book to buy, most importantly, and copies are for sale. But you know, to me, it reads like it is fact, not fiction. But it reads like a great mystery novel. It reads like a series of mystery novels. And so if you think about it this way, what do the civil rights battles of the 60s, Watergate, the death of Princess Diana, the Monica Lewinsky scandal, the Unabomber, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, the anti-Vietnam War movement all have in common? Terry Lenzner was in the middle of all of them. Now think of it that way, okay?
So good, Bill.
Now, and not causing trouble, but trying to get people out of trouble.
Right.
And in all of those, and so many of them, what I found so interesting is there are echoes of the issues that he was dealing with at the time that are still around today, and still relevant today, and in some cases even worse today than they were. So I was very excited to have you here, and thank you so much for giving us your time. I want to ask you about almost all of those events you've been involved in, but let me just start out by asking you, I mean, the investigator, 50 years of uncovering the truth, you are an investigator and an attorney. Did you learn investigative skills? Where the hell did you learn investigative skills? In law school?
No, absolutely not law school. No law school teaches lawyers how to conduct investigations that I know of. And certainly Harvard Law School, which is where I went, had no course like that at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, good.
So I learned it fortuitously because I was a young lawyer in a law firm in New York my second summer. And at the end of the summer, one of the senior partners said, "You really need to go see my friends at the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice because I can see you're bored by what we do here," and which was true. And so I went down to Washington and I joined the Civil Rights Division in 1964. And the investigation stuff, Bill, came from the first case I worked on, which was the murder of the 3 civil rights workers in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And I had to learn. I was out by myself, I mean, with some FBI guys, but I was out. I had no previous preparation, as I said, at the law school. And I just had to learn by listening to other people who were more experienced than I was, and getting to go interview people who had been victims of assaults by the law enforcement people in the city of Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, Mississippi, still must be said a disgrace that after the murders of James Chaney and Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, which you worked on cracking their case, it was Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Ronald Reagan decided to launch his presidential campaign.
Right.
Yeah, in 1980, I guess.
Something like that, yeah.
Whatever. I still can't accept that. But before we get into the cases I'd like to talk about, let me ask you, what was your, of all the ones you've been involved in, the toughest case to crack?
Well, that's a great question. I think the toughest case, the toughest cases I had ever were the investigation of the Alaska Pipeline, which was an incredibly complex case, and it was in Alaska, and the logistics were impossible, and we were spread out all over the state. We got $1 billion in revenue for the state back based on that investigation, but it was extremely difficult, and the oil companies were antagonistic and not cooperative at all.
Talk about echoes today.
Right.
We're talking about the Trans-Alaska Pipeline
Yes.
here, not the Keystone
No,
Pipeline.
not the Keystone one, but the Trans-Alaska was.
But some of the same issues, right? The company was asserting, as I recall, that everything was safe, there was no danger to the tundra, to
Right.
the environment at all, and they were playing with the numbers in terms of what their revenue was and what should go to the state, correct?
Yeah, they were driving down the revenue that went to the state by expensing all kinds of things that were gratuitous and not necessary for the construction project. So that was our job, was to knock out that money.
Who was your client?
The state of Alaska.
And that pipeline, I mean, it was built.
48-inch pipeline, one of the largest ever built in the United States, across the entire state of Alaska.
Right. By the way, you know, maybe some of you haven't been here before. Our format is we have half an hour, Terry and I do, to have our conversation, and then we'll get you all involved in the conversation. So think of your questions as we go along.
I think the other most difficult thing, if I could just add one other case, is the trial of the Berrigan brothers, because the government was adamant about convicting them, they were incredibly impressive people. I got to know Phil and Dan and the others, and they were really committed to peace. But the government didn't believe that, and so they decided that they were revolutionaries or terrorists, and they indicted them, and we were able to, there was an informant that the government had hired that was, everything Phil told him went straight to the government.
He was in prison with Phil, wasn't he?
With Phil, exactly. And
Phil, for all of you know, maybe you said this, a priest.
Right.
With his brother, who was also, was Dan a priest?
Dan was a priest also.
Priest as well, right.
And they were incredible people, and they were really committed to getting the slaughter of kids. That was what they were. The initial idea was to destroy draft card records, so that the students, the kids, would not be drafted, and that's what they were first indicted for. And we got them off because the informant. I managed to make the informant look like he was a flat-out liar.
Well, I think you're being too modest in terms of your role in there. The informant's name was Boyd Douglas,
right.
Correct? And he was sort of the star of the show until you got to cross-examine him.
Right, that's true.
And were able to find out or point out to the jury or to the judge what?
Well, that he made things up. He was misleading the government itself. He was not informing them of things he was doing, and he was encouraging women at Bucknell University, which was close to the Lewisburg Penitentiary, to engage in resistance and destroying the ROTC building and events like that.
You came to this case, as you say in the book, not as a flaming liberal yourself.
No.
Right? How did Phil Berrigan bring you around?
Well, he brought me around by just being Phil Berrigan, and it was incredibly moving because I went to Lewisburg Penitentiary to be with Phil and Sister McAllister and some of the other nuns and priests, and in those meetings in Phil's cell, the nuns would bring little bottles of red wine, and we'd have homilies and a communion, and Phil would talk about the meaning of the Bible, which frankly I had not been brought up to know, and it was a huge education to me, and it was incredibly moving, and for the first time in my life I found significance in his description of what the Bible was all about.
And what the government was accusing them of doing,
right,
was just working to end a war. And
right, exactly.
You talk about when you were cross-examining Boyd Douglas, that some people thought you were too tough on him.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, it was Phil Berrigan who came to me during the first recess and said, "Terry, don't you think you're being too mean to Boyd Douglas?" And, God bless Phil for being what he was. But I said, "Phil, I'm trying to keep you out of jail." So, that's my job, and I'm sorry to say, but I'm going to continue to do that. And you can feel sorry for Boyd Douglas if you want, but that's not my goal.
Let's jump to, not in any chronological order, to Watergate, because you got there and you were the Democratic counsel, and Fred Thompson
was a Republican.
Was the Republican counsel.
Right.
And the two chairs were Sam Ervin for the
right.
Democrats and
Howard Baker
for the Republicans. Can you imagine a team like that working today? I mean, it was unusual, the two of them. And you went into this, right? And it was, well, let me ask you the question. Contrast that hearing, that set of hearings, with what we saw with the Clinton impeachment?
That's a parody. I mean, that's a joke, really, because this was a cooperative effort. This was the senators, Baker, Thompson, Weicker, they recognized the importance of what we were doing. This is a impeachment, headed to impeachment for the President of the United States, which is a pretty serious thing, and which the Congress shouldn't be undertaking unless they have, a serious issues that they think are justified doing something like that, because it's a very radical movement for doing that in the United States. But they all got together and said, we're going to do this the right way. And they did it. They did it the right way. And otherwise, it could have blown up in chaos.
Did you know going in that you were going to bring down a president of the United States?
Absolutely not.
Did you have that intent?
No, absolutely. We were just looking. I had no thought when we started our investigation that the president would even be named as a participant in the dirty tricks and the break-ins and the cover-ups and all that. It seemed inconceivable to me that the president would have allowed himself to be involved in that. As it turned out, of course, he was deeply involved in all of that. So that kind of turned the tide. And at some point during that time period, the Republicans decided that they better jump on the wagon and began to support what we were doing.
John Dean. I think most Americans, they think of the name John Dean. He's the hero of the day. He's the one that came first one to come forward and everything. You don't have too high an opinion of John Dean. Why? I
don't have a high opinion of John Dean because, first of all, when I first interviewed him, all he wanted to talk about was the women in the White House who he was having relationships with, which I didn't think was particularly appropriate, since we were doing a very serious investigation, and he was putting this issue in as if this was more important than anything we were asking him about. And then the second thing was that I felt that Dean was going against the president, and I don't object to that, but I think he was doing that to protect his own rear end because he wanted to get a deal. He tried to get a deal with us, and he tried to get a deal with the special prosecutor, and it was clear that that's what his goal was, ultimately.
How important was it that these hearings were televised?
Huge. Absolutely huge.
Was there ever any question about it?
Well, there was a question about it because at the beginning of the investigation, when we were going on television, there were a couple of senators who were concerned that if we drove the soap operas off the daytime shows, they would be in political trouble. The people would resent that, because we were taking some of their favorite shows off the air. And so we had to actually...
God forbid, right?
Right. We actually had to fight.
Days of our lives.
Right. We actually had to fight to keep them from saying we can't televise these hearings, because we had to get these people in front of the cameras so that the country could hear and see them, what they were up to and what they had done to that date. But that was the one area that they were that we had problems with.
I found it interesting that you believe that there's been too much focus, perhaps, if I read correctly, on the break-in at the Watergate with the movie and Woodward Bernstein and everything, right, and that wasn't really the heart of what Watergate was all about.
I think the heart. That's right, Bill. And I think the heart of the case was in part the break-in, obviously, but the break-in had ulterior motives. There was a specific plan and motive and goal that they were seeking to achieve by breaking into
which was what?
Which was to find out from Larry O'Brien, the head of the Democratic National Committee, and other people who were involved, to find out what they knew about the monies that Howard Hughes had provided Bebe Rebozo to improve the president's Key Biscayne's properties. And we have a chart, I should have brought it with me, that showed all the money in cash that was paid to Bebe Rebozo to improve the Key Biscayne properties. Since the president had been previously embarrassed in 2 previous elections by the Howard Hughes money that Don Nixon, who started the Nixon burger chain, he did, literally.
The Nixon burger chain.
Burger
I
chain.
just want to be sure that
And
you
he
all
borrowed a
appreciate
couple $100,000 from Howard Hughes to start the chain, and that became, the Democrats leaked that in one of the previous elections, and really ruined Nixon's chances, opportunities.
And your focus was not so much on the break-in as on the dirty tricks, right?
Yeah, that was my first assignment. We did a major investigation of the dirty tricks, and I want to say to you all that one of the most egregious issues that I thought arose, which didn't get much focus, was the fact that the Republicans had this ingenious plan to affect the outcome of the Democratic primaries. And since at that year, you may remember, in 1972, the favorite candidate for the Democrats was Senator Edward Muskie from Maine, and they went after him tooth and nail with dirty tricks, with false information, with leaking things, and their plan was to, if they could eliminate Senator Muskie who was clearly the favorite candidate, they could then go into the general election spending almost no money because they had a candidate that was not going to be particularly effective. Turned out to be Senator McGovern, and it was on hindsight, it was an incredibly ingenious plan, and it almost worked.
Well, again, echoes today. Was this Oppo, as we call it, research gone awry, or was it legitimate Oppo research?
No, it was not legitimate Oppo research. I have done legitimate Oppo research.
Yes, you have. We'll get to some of that, right?
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I'm looking forward to it. No, this was literally dirty tricks. It was underhanded. It was improper. It was some of it was illegal. Some of it was using information that was stolen from different candidates. They had put Republican individuals into the Democratic Party campaigns, and they were stealing the plans, the secrets, who was contributing money, and then disseminating information to damage the not only Muskie's popularity, but other Democratic candidates.
Let's jump forward to another impeachment process you were part of the Clinton impeachment process, where your role was to do Oppo research on Linda Tripp and Monica Lewinsky. Who hired you, and how did you feel about doing that kind of dirty work?
Well, that's.
Or did you consider it dirty work?
Well, I did. What I considered it was the president and his lawyers hired us to. That's a comment on what we're talking about.
I know. Yeah, it is. No, the NSA is not so far away.
Welcome. Why should we be the only ones not covered by the NSA? I felt that we looked at a lot of individuals for different clients, and we do background profiles, which is totally benign. It's all from public record information, and it's partly a way to educate the public. In a political campaign, I've always felt that it was appropriate for people to examine candidates' histories and profiles, because the voters should know whether there's some imperfections or some problems in the history of a particular candidate. So I think that's appropriate research. What we were, and that's basically what we were doing with. I don't know about Linda Tripp. I don't think we ever looked at Linda Tripp. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we did much of anything with Monica Lewinsky, because she came onto the scene, I think, after we stopped working in that case. But again, there was nothing really significant about anything that we discovered.
Princess Di, of all the cases you were involved in, the one that I found the most bizarre was how you got involved in that whole controversy. Who was your client again, and what was your mission?
My client was a gentleman. A gentleman is a little pressing it a little bit too much, but
Loose use of the word, right?
the client was Mohammed Fayed, who bought Harrods.
Dodi's dad.
Dodi's dad, and an interesting character. And he called me. This was after the crash, and he had decided to rewrite history, basically, because his chauffeur was drunk and was the driver who drove the car into the wall in the tunnel. And my theory was that Mohammed felt so guilty about that he wanted to erase that fact and give himself some rationality about it wasn't really what he did or his man did. It was some act of faith that he couldn't control. So he hired me basically to rewrite that history.
But he had a theory about what happened, as opposed to just the drunk driver.
Right, and his theory was that the King and Queen of England and the royal family had conspired with the Secret Service in the UK to kill Diana because the royal family didn't want her and Dodi to become members of the royal family.
And you looked into this.
And we
right?
did look into that.
You reported back to your client?
We did. I called back to Mohammed some weeks later, and I told him that we didn't find a single scintilla of evidence that supported his theory. And he said, well, that's very interesting, and you're fired. And that was the end of that case.
Well, it was the end of your involvement in the case, but then the British government did a
investigation, right?
Which came to the same conclusion.
Absolutely the same conclusion, right? There was no way that Bill, we talked to a lot of intelligence people in the UK, in France, and other places, and they all said the same thing, which was, if this happened 10 or 15 years ago, it could have happened the way Fayed claims. But in this era, it would have been too sensitive and too valuable information to have stayed quiet and unknown, and therefore it was virtually impossible that this is what happened.
And I want to come back to then where you started, which was your first real case from the Justice Department. I mean, you were working with some giants there in this civil rights case. Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General.
Right.
John Doerr, Burke Marshall. Tell us about their involvement and what you found when you went down to Mississippi.
Well, first of all, they were great heroes of mine, all of them, and particularly John Doerr. I did a lot of work with John, and we were in Selma together. We were in Philadelphia together. We worked very closely with each other, and he was inspiring to me. He was incredibly hardworking. He was thoughtful. His motto was, the paper is the magic. You have to get things on paper, particularly on the voting rights stuff that we were working on. And so we methodically went about looking at people who were involved in assaults on innocent citizens previous to the murder case. And we were trying to get influencing people in the location, in the region, to come out and support and provide us with information. And we were trying to either intimidate them or convince them that the right thing to do is to come forward and give us information to get the people who killed these kids. Now, the chapter on that bill is called The Murder of the Innocents. And I changed the chapter from a Dr. King quote to that, because when I reread the Ku Klux Klan confession of their involvement in the murder, they basically took these three boys, put them on the road, and shot them in cold blood. And they didn't know them, they didn't know why they were there, they had no reason to do that, and it was just malice aforethought, and it was clear murder.
Did you have the sense you were part of history, making history with this? with your
I don't
work
think
there?
I made history, but I certainly felt that I was part of history. I mean, the Selma March was historic. The Philadelphia, Mississippi was historic. And a lot of the other things that we did were also historic. And I had a very interesting incident. We were out trying to desegregate high schools in Mississippi. And I was in Aberdeen, Mississippi, and I got to know the head of the Board of Education. And he invited me to go to a football game. He found out that I had played football. And I went to this football game with him, and there was a great quarterback there. And I said to the head of the Board of Ed, is that guy smart? Because maybe he could like to go to Harvard. And he said, I'll find out. And we met the next day, and he said he would be interested in going to Harvard, but we decided to voluntarily desegregate the high school. And the only possible explanation for that, because the lawyer that represented them was standing in the doorway saying, no, we're not going to desegregate, we're not going to desegregate. And I'm absolutely convinced that it was the football issue that convinced them. And that's the one thing that the people down in Mississippi understood. I mean, they understood guns and all that, trucks, but football was pretty significant to them.
Well, talk about echoes of today. I don't think that's still what they what they understand. But also, that echoes today is voting rights was the issue then. Just like in many of those states, it is the issue today.
It's come back.
Yeah.
It's exactly come back. It's amazing that they're reversing history. I mean, some of these kids were beaten up, some were killed in the attempt to provide the vote to African American voters in Mississippi and Alabama and other places, and yet we're trying to reverse, or some people are trying to reverse that entire victory.
We're just at the point where I want to open up to you, but I'm just going to take advantage of the chair to ask you about one other case, which I found that just, again, reminded me of everything that we've been through today, is a case that maybe didn't get as much public attention as the ones we've been talking about, is your investigation of Drexel Burnham and a guy named Barry Minkow, is that his
Barry
name?
Minkow, yeah.
Barry Minkow, right. But here is another case of financial firms out of control,
Totally.
right? Lying to and selling bogus products and
Totally.
yeah.
And he
tell us a little about it and what you found.
Well, this was a so-called ZZZ Best case, and Barry Minkow was an 18-year-old or 19-year-old guy in California who had been a hero, had become a hero for certain groups in California, and particularly the Drexel Burnham people who were about to float an $80 million bond offering.
Considered a financial genius, and everybody wanted to invest in the company, right?
Exactly.
Throwing
And
money at
people
him.
did throw a lot of money at it, all of which was lost eventually. But I went out to interview him because we were doing background investigation of Barry and his group. And to make a long story short, I said, where did you get your original money from? And he said, I can't remember, which is a kind of red flag about, where did I get my money from? And so we started looking into it, and it turned out that when we ran the historical data and some publicly available documents, we determined that, in fact, the money that originally he received was from a convicted organized crime felon.
And you took this information to Drexel Burnham.
Right. I called the head of the deal team, and I said, I put a hold on this investigation because obviously you're not going to want to invest in this company based on what I've learned. And the guy said, well, just continue to look at that and see. If Barry hasn't done anything wrong, we're going to go ahead with this. And so I then called him back about 2 or 3 weeks later and said, Barry's about to be indicted for fraud, corruption, money laundering. That stopped it.
Oh. And Drexel Burnham?
Drexel Burnham backed out of the case, out of that
And
investment.
eventually went out of business.
And went out of business, right.
Yeah. So
That was almost predictable by that time.
I think the moral of this story is when you get in trouble, you want Terry Lenzner on your side, right? You don't want him on the other side. Great stories, great life, and thank you for telling us all about it.
Thank you.
The Investigator, 50 years of uncovering the truth. Your witness, I might add here now.
That's good.
Yeah. Questions for Terry on any things we talked about? Craig? Oh, I'm sorry. Right.
Mr. Lenzner, as a fellow lawyer, I know lawyers don't write well. This book is beautiful.
Thank
It
you so
really is
much.
very well written. Tell me, intellectually, what was the toughest case you handled?
Well, I think those are great questions, I have to say, because there are a lot of tough cases. But I think, again, the Bergen trial was one of the toughest because it was on my conscience. Every night I couldn't sleep because I was so concerned about these priests and nuns getting convicted and being sent to jail forever. And so it took a lot of toll on me. But we were able to, as Bill pointed out, cross-examine the hell out of the informant, and it really turned the tide in front of the jury and made it a completely different case.
And in the end, we sort of skipped over that. What was the final verdict?
Not guilty. The only guilty thing that they came up with was that Boyd Douglas had been taking letters out of the prison, and that was illegal under the the federal penal statutes, and so they were indicted for secretly taking letters out to people outside the prison, and they didn't go to jail for any of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a real victory for us.
So I'll hand over here. Yes, we'll get the microphone to you.
Yeah, I have a question about Philadelphia. My understanding is that probably a mob of 20 or 25 people were involved in murdering Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, but only 2 people were prosecuted, and that a large number of civil rights era crimes remained unprosecuted. And to this day, there's a Civil Rights Division office devoted to investigating those cases. If my facts are correct, why? Is it because you were unable to, or the prosecutors were unable to crack the culture of loyalty?
Well, one of the primary obstacles to anything we were doing in terms of prosecution was that the jurors were all white, and the juries were selected from the voting registration polls. And since African Americans weren't allowed to vote and couldn't be in the rolls, there was no representation of any kind in terms of the minority people living in Mississippi. Now, I think we actually indicted more than 2 people. I'm pretty certain we indicted more than 2 people. We may have only convicted a handful of them, but we were lucky to get a conviction. I mean, that was a miracle. John Doerr tried that case and did an incredible job, and if he hadn't done it, we probably wouldn't have gotten a conviction. But that was a major victory for us.
To your knowledge, are there still some of these crimes being investigated today? Or is that
I know that from an assistant U.S. attorney in Mississippi that they are conducting investigations on cold cases, what we call cold cases, where there was serious injuries or murder. When we were looking for the bodies of the 3 civil rights workers, the FBI and some of our people found 2 or 3 bodies floating in a river that had been killed years before that. So there's no telling exactly how many atrocities occurred during that period, during that era. And to put it back together again, to find people who are willing to testify, even today, is extremely difficult.
I know we had a question. Oh, here we are. While we're on this side. Hi, Frank.
Hi. I'm wondering, over the course of your career, is there a case where you really found yourself barking up the wrong tree, or where subsequent events sort of revealed to you that you were kind of, found out something you wish you had discovered at the time?
Did
you blow a case?
Did we blow a case?
That's, Thank you for the translation. I think
That's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. I can't think of anything.
nobody has a perfect batting record,
Well,
so
that's
it's
true.
okay. It's okay if you.
No, we don't have a perfect batting record.
Those didn't make the book.
Are you kidding? Why would I do that? But no, seriously, what case did we do that we didn't do well, is what you're asking.
Or just found out later that something that history showed you had missed.
That you got it wrong or wrong.
Well, I don't think we ever got it. Well, the tobacco case was you mean the Wygand case? Yeah. Yeah, what we were hired was to look at a profile of Wygand, the whistleblower in that case, and that's what we did. What occurred was partly our fault, which was that the facts that we obtained turned out to be not completely accurate, and we should have double-checked and sustained our inquiry to determine that before. Now, the tobacco company actually gave our material to their public relations people without telling us. As a result, we never got a chance to double-check the material that they were about to publish, and that was a problem. That was not a mistake. I mean, I would not say that we suddenly discovered something about him that would have justified not doing what we did.
No, but I think when he started to ask the question, it seemed like you're saying, did you ever take a case with it and you ended up thinking at the end you were on the wrong side?
I would not say that necessarily we felt, or I felt that we were on the wrong side on that case, because we were doing what we do for years and years and years, and as I said earlier, to gather information that is educational and useful to people who are either consumers or voters is, I think, an appropriate thing for an investigator.
Your client there were the tobacco companies?
Yes.
Right. And your company now, right, is, I didn't mention that, is IGI.
Right, the Investigative Group International.
Which your son runs and you're still involved with,
Right,
correct?
exactly.
Well, and I guess that raises the question, a lot of people knock on your door, but do you take anybody who knocks on your door, or are there standards?
Well, there absolutely are standards, and I mean, my greatest concern on that bill is we don't want to generate information that is going to be used for extortionate purposes. I mean, that's my greatest fear, is somebody will come to us and say, I have this problem, I want to get some research done on it, this is why we want this information. But in fact, it turns out possibly that they're going to use it for improper purposes. To go to somebody and say, if you don't provide us with information that we need, we're going to expose this other information that Lenzner got.
So you probably have to do a little oppo research on your potential clients before
all
you
the time.
accept them.
Yeah, all the time. We always do a background on the potential clients.
Did you do any oppo research on me before you? Question over here. I don't want to hear the answer.
We didn't find it. We didn't even find anything interesting, Bill. I'm sorry.
Oh!
Carol, do you want to add to that?
The severest cut of all.
I want to add to what Bill Press said. I just enjoyed the book so much. I thought it was so much fun to read. Maybe because someone has finally written a book about characters and events that happened in my lifetime. I mean, it's sort of. But I do have a question. One thing you take away from the book is the importance of facts as opposed to wishes and that sort of thing. But I'm going to ask you a question of opinion, and that is, you talk quite a bit about the church committee investigating the CIA, and I'm curious if you have an opinion or what your opinion is as to whether in the long run the church committee's investigation was helpful or not to the security of the United States.
Well, my feeling about that is that it was helpful to the United States. because any time some of the activities that came out of that investigation, the public should have known about it well before. It's like the NSA. If the public is not aware of what the government is doing, then we're going to be continually surprised, and we will end up not trusting what we're being told by the government. And that's kind of the way I felt about first of all, I had a client who was actually involved with the CIA in a number of the assassination attempts. And that was something that he was obviously told to do, and he felt he was a patriot for following his orders. But by the same token, when it came out, it was shocking to people, and it should have been shocking, that we were going around to international locations and trying to kill foreign leaders. And I know when I talked to, this was Dr. Sid Gottlieb, who was the head of the Technical Service Division, we had a lot of discussions about how are we going to explain this, because he had to testify under oath, and we conceded what he knew, but it was embarrassing for the country more than for Sid. He was doing what he was told to do.
Yeah, I want to jump in there because this kind of goes back to Frank's question, which was, are there some clients you may have looked back and said, why did I represent him? I mean, Sid Gottlieb was in charge of the assassination program of the CIA, right? I mean, you must have known, whoa, this is not something that the United States government ought to be involved in.
Well, I knew that, and Sid knew it too. But
he was proud of it, wasn't he?
Well,
you pointed out he wanted to just come forward, have a news conference, and
yes,
say, "This is what I did."
Right. Which I vetoed, because obviously having him go out on television in a news conference and talk about some of the things that he had been involved in would have been counterproductive for his stand.
And some of the, if you could just, some of the tricks, whatever, that they were coming up with to kill people. I mean, we'd know about the exploding cigar, I guess, with Castro. What were some of the others? Do you recall?
Well, I know that they did something with a clamshell in the waters in Cuba, whatever that was. I can't even remember the details of that, but they were, a lot of it was CIA guys who were sort of dreaming of things to make up that were exciting or, I don't know, interesting. Most of it never occurred. Most of it was never successful. But by the same token, it was embarrassing to the country, and it's a little bit like, I think, as I said, the NSA thing in foreign countries, that we're now embarrassed by the fact that we've been overhearing leaders of foreign countries, which is not perhaps as bad as what the CIA was doing with the foreign leaders, but pretty bad.
Listening in rather than trying to assassinate them. This was the difference. There was, and just a little vague on in the book, when Gottlieb was testifying, that a senator asked him a question, and you ordered a break, or you somehow engineered a break,
yes,
so you could talk to Gottlieb, and then he came back and basically spilled the beans about some things that the CIA had been involved in.
That's
which,
correct.
Yeah, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, we were a little bit surprised because I thought I had taken a look at all the documents related to what Sid would be asked about, and this, at the very end of his session in the committee, Senator Schweiker from Pennsylvania handed us a memo that was entitled Human Alteration Committee. Human Alteration Committee.
Okay.
And
I guess if you killed them, you've altered something.
anyway, no, it wasn't to kill him; it was to alter him.
Altered them.
It's a
Term of art, I'm sure, in
term
the
of art,
CIA.
right.
Yeah.
So, Sid turned blank white when he saw this, and I said, "Sid, what's this all about?" Because I had never heard about this, and he said, "Let's go outside." So I went outside with him, and he started doing Tai Chi in the dark. And I said, "Sid, there's a problem here. What is this?" And and he said, I'm going to have to explain this to you. And
And you knew you were in trouble.
I was in trouble. And so we had to go in and revise his testimony based on what he told me.
But he admitted that these were things that had actually worked.
Let me think about that for a second. I think that one of them did work. There was an army colonel in Libya, I think, who they sent a gift to, which was a scarf, but unfortunately, the scarf was filled with tuberculosis, and so.
Ooh, ooh.
So anyway, the colonel no longer was a problem for the government.
These are some things we were involved in. All right. Do we have time for more questions? Let me see. I think we do. This stuff. Yes. Right. If we can get the mic over here. Hi. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry, can you talk about your industry today, the investigatory business, and
Yeah, of
the
course.
impact of electronic technology and change and decentralization of information? Does everybody think they can do what you do? And in fact, increasingly, can every person do what you might do?
That's a great question too. The answer is that a lot of people are. My major concern with regard to that question is if people in the industry become lazy and not careful, we could start having people reporting to information that they get from a database, from a computer, from some other source that's electronic, and we'll start to provide information that may be defamatory to people without having it checked and double-checked, and without interviewing the people that are providing the information to make sure that they're accurate and their memory is correct. So there are companies and people that are doing that, and they are selling that information. And my concern is it's going to devalue the quality and the importance of the ability to collect factual information for people's use. So I think that's a valid issue, and it remains to be seen how that's going to work itself out.
But related, if I can follow up, is how did you do this without Wikipedia? I mean, when you got started, you couldn't do what we all do now.
No, we
couldn't
couldn't.
go on a date with somebody now. You Google them first, right?
Right.
I mean,
Well, sure.
you couldn't do that.
Well,
What were your sources? And
Our sources.
And has the availability of all this online technology, it must have changed your profession.
Oh, yeah.
Make it easier.
it made it easier and it made it harder because as I said, it became easy, then it became too easy to take information out and use it, or misuse it, or sell it to some client, and create negative results of that. So yeah, I think you really have to continue to be careful, no matter how effective and how efficient and how fast the computers work. You just cannot assume that it's not garbage in and garbage out, and that's something that we spend a lot of time worrying about. And I just hope that the community recognizes that problem.
Well, again, a fascinating life, a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing it with all of us, and again for coming tonight. And the other thing that I took away from this is, we hear so much about the senators and our elected officials and the members of Congress and other maybe big media celebrities, but we don't hear so much about the people who are doing the really good work and the steady work and the public servants that work for our government, and you've worked for the government and for the private sector. But people like you that are really there, who are dedicated, who are determined, and who are doing great work and a great public service. And so I really appreciate the work that you've done and want to salute you for it and thank you for it. Thanks for
Bill.
coming again tonight.
Thank you.